Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Webster, and I'm the Director of Admissions at Carleton College. We are delighted to welcome you to tonight's Six Colleges webinar entitled Majors, Minors, and More, the Academic Experience. Tonight's agenda is full of great information from our six colleges. In the first 30 minutes, you'll hear from faculty and students from Amherst, Bowden, Carleton, Pomona, Swarthmore, and Williams, representing different academic interests, geographies, ages, and identities. For the final 30 minutes, our panelists will take questions from all of you using our Q&A feature on Zoom. We're as excited as you are to dig into all of this tonight, but a few housekeeping items are in order right now. First, this event is being recorded and closed captioning is available. Please click that, what's it called? It is called subtitles on the bottom of your screen if you'd like to get access to that. A recording of this session will be posted on sixcolleges.org. That'll be typed out and shared in a moment. That's where a lot of our content tends to show up. This is part of a long-standing series of virtual sessions that this group has done, now going into its third year. If you missed any of the other events, which cover, frankly, a bafflingly wide range of topics, you can find those recordings at sixcolleges.org as well. You'll also find additional upcoming sessions, which will end up on the website too. So keep track of your email to register for those as well. So second, this event is a Zoom webinar format, which means you can see us and hear us, but we can't see you or hear you. We will be taking questions though, so if you'd like to ask one, do use the Q&A feature and we'll get to as many as we can, particularly in the back 30 minutes of this session. That's my way of saying chat is disabled, so you should not be able to talk to each other or directly to us. And as a reminder, subtitles are enabled, so if you need a little bit of help following what we said or would rather simply read it rather than hear it, that option is available to you. Finally, and to maybe state the obvious, we understand that many of you are interested in one or more of our colleges. To learn more about us individually, we invite you to visit our respective websites to participate in other virtual programming. However, tonight's program, along with all the other six colleges programming, is meant to provide you with information about what it might be like to live and learn at a selective, fully residential liberal arts college, of which we are exemplars. With that in mind, we hope you'll ask questions, not about one individual college, but about our major themes tonight, such as finding faculty mentors, studying in intimate classroom settings, and pursuing research and other experiential learning opportunities within a liberal arts context. Now that we've gotten the logistics out of the way, let's meet our panelists tonight. We'll go in alphabetical order because that's the default of these sort of things, and we'll kick things off with Amherst. So I'll hand it off.
Hi, I'm Rick Lopez. I am at Amherst College. I am originally from the border region between the US and Mexican border in West Texas. I am a professor at Amherst of History, Environmental Studies, and I'm currently the chair of Latinx and Latin American Studies. Anything else I'm supposed to throw in there? I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Professor Lopez. We'll hand it off now to Bowden.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremiah Brown. I am a senior at Bowden College. I'm majoring in sociology with a minor in gender, sexuality, and women's studies. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm originally from Cabot, Arkansas.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Carleton?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ross Elfline. I am a professor of modern and contemporary art history here at Carleton. I will just say the focus of my research, we haven't talked about this. What I work on is I work on unbuildable buildings. What I write about is conceptual art and architecture. I'm originally from a small town in northern Illinois. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you very much, Professor Elfline. Pomona?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rohan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a senior at Pomona studying economics and with a politics minor. I'm originally from New York City. Besides tour guiding, some of the things I do on campus is that I do research at one of our political economy labs, as well as do a lot of event planning. And I'm also the senior class president at Pomona.
Thank you, Rohan. Looking for Swarthmore, I think.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior at Swarthmore College, where I'm double majoring in computer science and art history. And aside from tour guiding and also helping with info sessions, I am a student athlete on the women's varsity soccer team.
Thank you, Rebecca. And handing it off to Williams.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lee Park. I'm a professor of chemistry at Williams College. I am a synthetic materials chemist, and I'm originally from the Bay Area.
Thank you, Professor Park. Appreciate it, everyone, taking a moment to introduce yourself and ground this conversation in the personalities and experiences we have with us tonight. I do want to start this off with a chance to hear a little bit more from each of our panelists, if I can. And to start that off, I'd like to hand it off to Professor Elfline at Carleton to speak for a few minutes about sort of the selective liberal arts college experience at sort of a higher level. So, Professor Elfline.
Thanks very much. And it's nice to be with all of you tonight. I want to thank all of you for taking a little bit of time out of your evenings to join us as well. And it's also a welcome chance for me to hear from folks from other colleges. So I want to say hello to my fellow panelists as well. And so, yeah, I'm going to kick things off a little bit by talking in a more general way about the liberal arts experience. I'm sure there'll be some overlap with what my fellow panelists will say in a moment. I just hope that there's not too much overlap there. So I'll talk for about 5 minutes or so. I'm sure that my esteemed colleague at Carleton will cut me off if I'm getting too long, which is one of the perennial problems of any professor. So a few things that I'll say initially is that one thing that's really important for me to mention, I don't often sort of like self-disclose in panels like this, but I am myself a product of the liberal arts experience. And so I think that that is important to say that one reason that I'm in front of you is because I had a fantastic experience at a liberal arts college as an undergraduate. And one thing that's really important for me to mention is that a lot of, how should I put it? A lot of the reason that I'm here in front of you is also because of, quite frankly, like the kind of opportunities that, you know, going to a liberal arts college afforded to somebody like me. As I might have mentioned at the beginning, I'm from a small farming community in rural Illinois originally, and I was able to go to college thanks to the not only a fantastic financial aid package that was provided to me, but also to the federal Pell Grant program, right? And so one thing that I think is really important about the kinds of things that liberal arts colleges do, right, is that they do really envision this, the idea of creating a community of scholars. And a community of scholars, which is really made up of a diverse group of people, right, that are there not due to some sort of like act of fate, due to their financial situation or other markers of status, right? But one thing that our colleges really do attempt to do is to create a community of scholars that are there because they do believe in this idea of lifelong learning, for one thing, right? But also the kind of lifelong learning across difference and across different disciplinary fields, which is something which I think is essential to a sort of like a liberal arts experience, right? And so that was really important to me, I should say, you know, coming from you know, like I said, a small rural community, you know, the perspective of coming in as a queer student was also something that was also very important to my identity then, and still is very much to my work as well, right? And so that's one thing that I would say initially, right? But this leads me to talk a little bit more about another thing that liberal arts colleges provide in particular. And I should just say here that one thing, I feel like as a good scholar, I have to cite my sources. So much of what I'm about to say, I'm cribbing from a political theorist named Wendy Brown, who does work on, in effect, sort of like theories of democracy, which is also very much the sort of like the core of my current research, right? And so one thing that I would say is that we can look at sort of like the founding of the liberal arts college, which is in many ways an American product, right? This is a form of education that we do not see necessarily replicated around the world, right? And so the founding of the liberal arts college is something that we actually can see as something of a sort of like an American experiment, right? An American experiment that I also think goes hand in hand with sort of like the democratic principles of this country. And so what do I mean by this, right? that the founding of the liberal arts college in America was really meant initially, the sort of like the goal of the liberal arts education, right, was to provide a sort of like a broad base of knowledge, right, to as many of the American populace as possible, in order to create a certain idea of what it meant to be a participatory citizen, right? A participatory citizen in the sort of like the democratic experiment in many ways, right? So what I mean by that, right, is that when we think of what our, the people who founded these colleges, what they really meant to sort of like to impart to the student body, was an idea that in order to solve the complex problems that we find in our world then and now, right? What that really requires is really the ability to think about problems from a variety of different perspectives and a variety of different disciplines, right? I'll also mention that as an undergraduate, I was an economics major and I ended up an art history professor, right? And so this is to say that, like, my background in approaching issues from an art historical standpoint, from thinking about issues of power and authority, right? That was something that was very important to me. And so I would just say going forward that, again, this is one thing that I think is really important for our kinds of institutions, is that we are providing a certain form of education that, again, encourages our students to think broadly and across difference and how it is that we're going to solve many of the problems that we have today. So sorry if I went a bit long there.
Thank you, Professor Elfline. Very helpful, and appreciate that spirited and helpful introductory framing of a sort of liberal arts environment for our families and students. Now, I think it'd be helpful to hear a little bit more from students. And so for that, I'd turn over to Rohan and Pomona to talk a bit about the broader sort of curricular dimension of maybe what Professor Elfline has underscored.
Right. So I think one of the cool things about a liberal arts college is that you eventually will declare a major. I think most of these schools you will end up declaring a major at the end of your sophomore year, but kind of your major is not your entire life. I think one of the most rewarding parts of being in a liberal arts college is being able to explore in fields that you thought you would never have the opportunity to do so, and actually making connections between those fields. So like I said, I was an economics major, but that doesn't mean my coursework, even as a senior, looks like 4 economic classes a semester, right? Like this semester I'm taking a music class, also taking like a history class, and there's a lot of different disciplines that people will continue to explore throughout their 4 years here. I think what's really interesting is that even though I am an economics major, I think there's a lot of interdisciplinary connections that are being made throughout like all the courses and coursework I'm taking. So whether that be like my music class, which is more about like the political history of music, looking at queer voices in music, I've made connections to like a comparative politics class I've taken, and I'm taking economics class, entirely focused on gender and women issues in economics. And so I think these are just examples of how broad our curriculum at these colleges are in general, and that you have the opportunity to kind of go beyond what you think you want to study. And I think for a lot of people, when they're applying to college, especially people who would be interested in liberal arts college, they don't necessarily know what they would like to study. And I think the great thing about a liberal arts college is that you're able to explore. And I think you will be encouraged your first year, especially your first 2 years here, to keep on exploring and keep on having like different kind of pathways to take. And I think at the end of the day, what's really interesting is that you could take a class not in your major, for example, like a music class or like a sociology class, and you will start learn a lot that is applicable to other parts of your life or your curricular work. And I think what is really interesting to me is that you're able to kind of like learn how to analyze at a liberal arts college. And so it's often said that you're able to make critical thinking skills. And part of it is because regardless of the class you take or the subject matter, you're going to be able to like learn how to, you're going to have like a smaller class size and be able to learn how to write in that field and learn how to write in general and learn how to think about different concepts and learn how to like, take one thing in a discipline and connect it to another. And I think that flexibility and being able to kind of explore whatever you want and being continually like curious about things is what makes the liberal arts college experience so great academically. And so that's what you'll find that most of my peers at like Pomona and other liberal arts colleges, they don't necessarily care about like my entire life is this one subject, but are more like what seems interesting to me and like what does my college offer that I want to explore and take advantage of.
Thank you, Rohan. Now we'll hear from Professor Lopez at Amherst, who will talk a little bit about how our liberal arts education compares to larger selected universities.
All right. Hi, I realized I left off something from my introduction. I think I failed to mention that I'm Dean of New Students, which means I help students transition into Amherst College. And this also links, thinking of Ross Steffline's mentioning of scholarship. This to me, I got into this because I was interested in nation formation in my scholarship. And that in turn goes back to the fact that I was the first gen college student back when I went to college at a small liberal arts college, which I think set my path. There are a lot of things that you get at a liberal arts college that are very different than what you would find at a large research university. Some of the most obvious are that you'll be in small classes, not just some of your classes, but almost all of your classes. You might have like an intro chem that's big, but even that's going to be broken up into a lot of small sections. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to get to know your professors one-on-one. Now, I was a graduate student teaching back when I was at Yale, so I had nothing against graduate students and the teaching they're going to do. They do a great job, but it's not the same as getting to work one-on-one with the professor, getting to do research together, giving them the opportunity to get to know you and your passions, to get to know you as a person, and as opportunities emerge, and professors find out about opportunities all the time. They'll think back and think, oh, I remember Anna, right? I remember Rohan. They had a fantastic interest. They're so interested. This would be a perfect opportunity for them. So you have that one-on-one, the sense that someone is really getting to know you for who you are and helping plug you in with things that you're interested in. And this extends beyond the classroom. You go to meet your professors regularly. I know I have students over at my house all the time. I think that's true for all of my colleagues. I think that's true for most professors at liberal arts colleges. I've sat on many panels from different alumni, and they talk about the impact, the intellectual impact they had when a certain professor sat down and talked to them and challenged their thinking, got them to talk about this idea. And these are people who sometimes have graduated 30 years ago, and they're still remembering that conversation they had with the professor and how much it set the path for their intellectual inquiry and for their career. You also get a way in which not only are you meeting people from across different backgrounds, because it's a small liberal arts college, you can't isolate yourself in the same way that you can at a large university, but you're also thinking across different disciplines. And an example of what that can breed comes from a graduate. I'm in the history department, and we had someone who graduated from the history department who developed something. You know, when you Google something, say you Google the local restaurant down the road, and it pops up a thing on the right side of your screen. It shows you the Yelp review, shows you their address, shows you all these different kinds of things. And that was developed by a history major at Amherst College, who never took a computer science class until his senior year. And the only reason he finally took one, because he was going to work for Google, and he thought, well, I should at least take one before I go work for Google. But the reason he was able to conceive of that as a need is because he worked across disciplines in a liberal arts college where he couldn't just narrowly define himself through a computer science department. And he thought about how people use knowledge, how people think about it, what kind of things do they need to access. And so when you think about a liberal arts college, so many people ask themselves, well, what am I going to do with this? Wouldn't it be easier just to go to a big university and major in some super specific thing that there's a laid out path? When you go to some place like Amherst or Williams or Carleton or Swarthmore, Pomona, Bowden, people know what these are. They know that you're bringing a kind of learning, a kind of adaptability to whatever context you're working on. And that's something that you can only get from a liberal arts college.
Thanks, Professor Lopez, for showcasing some specific features of liberal arts colleges and how they're different in the larger marketplace of colleges and universities. There's something special in the mix and makeup of the way we run and structure our courses. Now we'll hear from Jeremiah at Bowden, who's looking to discuss some of his experiences with faculty. Jeremiah?
Thanks everyone for being out tonight. I'm going to touch on 3 main topics. So the first being the value of small classes. Overall, I think that as Professor Lopez just kind of mentioned, at one of these colleges, you do have much smaller courses overall. You have less people in the classroom, and what that breeds is an intellectual community amongst your fellow peers. I have had the privilege of being in multiple small classrooms of under 10 students altogether, both classes in my major and classes outside of my major. And that has been an absolutely wonderful experience, just because when you're with those other students, as you kind of dive into the knowledge, you don't just learn about one another and your backgrounds and your histories and how you differ, but you also learn how they are as students and how they are as thinkers. And everyone's coming to these courses from different disciplines. So yes, there will be students in the class who are in the major. However, there are also students who are coming from outside of the major, and they bring that knowledge into the classroom, and it challenges how you think, and it kind of brings that really specific knowledge that you wouldn't have otherwise into your vantage point. And all of a sudden you're learning those things as well. For example, in one of my small intro to chem classes that I took, we talked about language overall and how we use like bacteria kills, bacteria destroys. Now people take antibiotics for viral infections despite it doing nothing. And it was an English major who brought up that point, thinking about how the language of bacteria kind of influences how everyday people see it whenever you don't demystify the scientific language. And so that again is the value of being in those close relationships where you're getting that kind of, someone's thinking about words, linguistics, and like what the actual meaning are. As a sociologist, I'm absolutely not thinking about that whatsoever. So that's a really cool opportunity within your classes, but you also develop these really close relationships with faculty. The second point I want to touch on, being as a student here, or being a student in any of these small colleges, you really get the opportunity to learn and meet your professors, and your professors get the opportunity to learn you. And they come to liberal arts colleges because they want to. They're making a choice to take an investment in students and to meet students like yourself. And so for me, a big surprise was walking into office hours. I had, as a first year, I had exactly what I wanted to ask. I knew what questions I needed answers to complete the homework. And my faculty member stopped me and said, whoa, first, like you're a first year, right? How's your transition to your college going so far? And we had a personal conversation, and the faculty member really got to know me, and they connected me to other resources here on campus to kind of help smooth my transition, thinking about weather season. They connected me to the dean's office. And because faculty members are invested in not only you, but the institution that they're within, they have all this knowledge and they have these opportunities to really connect to you. As a first year, when my roommate didn't have a place to go home for Thanksgiving, I just casually mentioned that in office hours, and my professor was like, oh, tell him to come over to my house. And sure enough, this professor who had never met this student, my roommate, invited my roommate over to Thanksgiving, and they had Thanksgiving dinner together, because our faculty members are interested in students overall and making sure that all students feel supported at these colleges and in their college transitions. So altogether, I really recommend the liberal arts curriculum because of the ways in which you can bond with your faculty member, and the ways in which I've seen myself change over my 4 years here at Bowden is unbelievable. And I know that is in large part because of the ways our faculty are approaching teaching and also student development.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Now, Professor Park at Williams will discuss some research opportunities for undergraduates across curriculum space. Professor Park?
Sure, thank you. A couple of us, in our introductions talked a little bit about our own scholarship. And so I think one thing to recognize is all the faculty are conducting their scholarship. So for me as a chemist, that means I have a research lab here, as do all of the scientists. Somebody in the history department might not need a lab space, but they are certainly pursuing their own scholarly work. And one of the things that's great at a small college is, especially in the sciences, where that's a very sort of hands-on activity and requires a lot of hands. Often what that means is that we have lots of undergraduates working with us in our research labs. And certainly there's research involving undergraduates across disciplines on all of our campuses. But I do think it's probably maybe the most visible in the sciences because all of our labs have sort of a group of students. So I will typically have between 4 and 6 students in my lab at any given time. And they can work with me during the academic year, during the summers, over winter study, and that's true throughout the sciences. And so, for instance, all of our institutions, but I can give you numbers for Williams because I'm most familiar with it. We typically have, on the order of 200 students doing summer research with us over the summer, and that's just in the sciences. There are also students doing research in our other divisions as well. And one of the things that I guess I would mention is that in the sciences especially, that's a very different experience than it would be at a bigger institution. At a bigger institution, a university, when I was in graduate school, my graduate group was about 25 students. And that was entirely graduate students and postdocs, right? There really wasn't much room for undergraduates. I can think of a single undergraduate that was part of our research group in the 5 years that I was in graduate school. Whereas at Williams, if you join a research group, it's only undergraduates. There are no graduate students, there are no postdocs. So you are working directly with the faculty. There's not a layer of other people in between you and the faculty. That also means that as an undergraduate, you are really able to, maybe not right at the very beginning, but you are able to take ownership of your project and really guide that project. All of the equipment and instrumentation that we have and all of our institutions are really tremendously well resourced in terms of that kind of equipment. All of that is available for you as a trained student to use. I often tell people when I was a graduate student, there were, there's a particular instrument that we use, which is called an NMR, and that's sort of a workhorse if you're a synthetic chemist, and everyone needs the NMR. And our NMRs in the department were in such high demand, we would never have let an undergraduate touch them. There's not a chance an undergraduate could have gotten on them. Whereas, at Williams, our NMR, and I know this is true at the other institutions as well, the only people running our NMR are our students. So again, there aren't people sort of elbowing you out of the way, and we train you to use those things and use that equipment. So there are a lot of research opportunities, again, across disciplines. I know the most about chemistry, obviously, just because that's my own field. But I have a lot of students, as others have said, I get to know a lot of my students, and a lot of those students have multiple interests. And so I get to hear what kinds of research they're doing in other disciplines, that are far, far from chemistry. And it's really exciting to see how students can do research in different disciplines and how those different experiences can inform each other. And I find that all the time, even for students working in my chemistry lab, they may have also done a philosophy project or a history project, and those can really inform in some way how they approach projects in my lab. So there are a lot of research opportunities, and that's one of the, I think, real advantages of being at a small place.
Thank you, Professor Park. And finally, Rebecca, you've patiently waited from Swarthmore to talk a little bit more about experiences pursuing academic opportunities beyond the classroom. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So Professor Park really laid out, I think, a great representation of just how many opportunities exist on these campuses to pursue research. I'll go ahead and say that when I arrived at Swarthmore, I never considered myself to be any sort of research student. I never did science research in high school or really pursued anything researchy. However, by the time I was a sophomore, I had already completed a research project, and that's because these opportunities exist for really any student. It doesn't just have to be a natural sciences student who's pursuing like a chemistry major. It's really in the humanities and the social sciences as well. I can speak on behalf of Swarthmore by saying that 2/3 of our students participate in research at some time on campus, and I can imagine it's the same at these other liberal arts schools, just because, again, there aren't any grad students there to kind of take up these roles. Instead, your professors will go above and beyond to actually reach out to you and see if you'd like to help them. And if not, you can also always propose a research project to them. And to kind of exhibit, I guess, how reaching out to professors works, I took a class in the philosophy department called Logic, and I really enjoyed it. And all I did was email my professor at the end of the semester and say, like, I really liked your class. What more can I do to learn more about this subject? And he ended up responding and saying, oh, perfect timing. I'd love to have you on board to be a part of my research project this summer. So just as easy as that, I was able to apply for funding from the school to work with him in a 10-week-long research project. And then I also got to present my research at the start of the school year and everything. So those opportunities exist everywhere. I had a friend whose research got published before she was a sophomore. Like, these opportunities, I can't say enough, are there for the students. And even if you don't think you'll do research, there's a good chance you will. And it's a great opportunity. In addition, I'd like to mention internships and kind of talk about career services. So on each and every one of these campuses, I'm sure we have incredible career services departments that go above and beyond to get students in for mock interviews, help them prepare, help them with resumes, cover letters, because it can be a bit of a daunting process when you're in college to think about recruiting for a summer or post-grad. Career services is amazing. I actually just had an interview last night and they really helped me prepare over the last couple of weeks. They got me into in all these mock interviews and stuff to get me ready. And additionally, to briefly mention grad school, personally, I'm not pursuing grad school at the moment, but it's super easy to walk away from a liberal arts degree and head in the grad school direction. I think like all 4 of my best friends here are pre-med. And so that's weird how that worked out, but it's super easy. You'll meet with an advisor that's like pre-med, pre-law, or maybe some other degree that you are interested in throughout your time here. I'm actually still on like all the email lists for pre-law because I came into SWAT thinking I would be a lawyer. And so I keep getting the emails, and there's so many informational sessions, as well as different avenues to get to know alums who are pursuing the field you're interested in as well. And so even beyond your professors who will guide you in that direction, if you want to pursue that, career services and also these individual groups for each grad school really help you. I think that's mostly it. I know we're a little tight on time.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca, very much for sharing that. And thanks to all our panelists for providing some framing and sort of edges to our conversation here. I am here now at 6:33 Central Time, 7:33 out east. I made this mistake earlier. So to give us a chance to think through some of the questions that have been flowing into the Q&A. I'll be moderating some of that, and I would encourage our panelists to take a look at the questions I've been queuing. If you're in the mood, I will call in a second. For those of you who are still interested in asking questions, please do that. The Q&A is wide open and waiting for you to submit questions. I'll also add that my fellow colleagues in admissions at all of the 6 colleges are busy in there answering questions or queuing them up for me. So if you're getting questions answered, that's who's doing it. So did want to use this as a final reminder to say that the questions that we will prioritize this evening are ones that are appropriate to this group of 6 colleges on behalf of highly selective liberal arts colleges, not ones specific to individual institutions. We remain excited to meet you at the individual and institutional level, but not this evening. So please bear with us as we queue this up. And yeah. With that, and over the next 26 minutes, I would love a chance to sort of ask some questions here. And so to start things off, I did want to ask for a little bit of student experience and maybe the flip side of the question for a faculty member here. And based on what I heard, I thought I'd start with Jeremiah. I have a question here about if there's a chance for students to talk with professors who do not teach them, like aren't their professors at that given time. Do you get a chance to just catch up with them before the class, maybe after you've had the class? Some of that's sort of what I would call slightly less mandatory form of engagement. Can you talk about experiences you might have had in that space?
Absolutely. I actually earlier this month had lunch with a professor that I had in my first year, who I have not taken a class with whatsoever anytime, but we ran into each other in the gym, and she recognized me somehow. 3 years later, she's taught 6 classes at least since then, and yet because you have those small classes, because you have those tight interactions, they still understand who you are and they still remember your dreams. So it was really cool that she remembered how many siblings I had and where my siblings were at college at still, even though it had been, again, years since we had seen each other. Beyond that, I think that there's also really robust opportunities for individual students. Whenever you're kind of meeting a professor who then points you in the direction of another professor. So personally, I'm a sociology major again, and yeah, I've been pointed in the direction of an education professor who is really closely aligned with my research interests. And that's because our faculty know one another, they know as students, and they have the opportunity to kind of form those connections that you as an individual student may not have that opportunity to, or you may not have your friends reach out to a professor for you, but the professor is more than willing to reach out to another professor and make that connection.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Appreciate that. I'm wondering if I can flip this one around and ask Professor Elfline at Carleton to talk a little bit about the same experience, but from a faculty point of view. Maybe it's meeting with a student who's not yet in your class, or providing some longer term advising or mentorship, or just general feedback with those sorts of students. So Professor Elfline?
Yeah, I mean, so while Jeremiah was talking about how it is that, he was surprised that a professor like remembered a student from 3 years ago, I'm just like, that's not surprising to me, because I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like, first of all, I would say sort of like, yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that I am at a small school is indeed for exactly what Jeremiah was saying. Like, I feel particularly invested, particularly in undergraduate education of students that are at a particular moment in their trajectory. And it's because I'm very curious about how these students are going to sort of like progress from the moment that they come into our colleges at 18 and beyond, right? So just an anecdote that I would just mention really quickly is that, so there are several, I've been at Carleton for 13 years now. So there's a whole cohort, several cohorts of students who have gone on since graduation. And it's the sort of thing where, like, I really value the fact that these are former students who are now peers of mine, right? These are people, these are real friendships that I have now in the time since they graduated. So when they come through the Minnesota area, when they come through the Twin Cities, it is really common for me to get together with them over a coffee or to go to dinner or something like that, just to catch up with them, right? And so this is to say that after graduation, that these are sort of like lifelong connections that I've that I have with my students, and I'm sure that my peers at other institutions would say similarly, right? But just in general, what I would say is that absolutely, that one thing that's really important for me in particular is that I love having conversations with students who have come from sort of like atypical, what we might think of as atypical backgrounds. So like, who comes from sort of like the rural Midwest, who are the queer students who have sort of like been admitted to our campus. I feel like I do a lot of mentoring, sort of like active mentoring of students who in many ways might feel like a student, in a sort of like an environment like this, that like it can be sometimes a little bit challenging. And I absolutely love hearing from them about sort of like their experiences, to make sure that they know that they are that they belong at a school like this. That's again one of the reasons that I ended up here.
Thank you, Professor Elfline, and thanks, Jeremiah, for weighing in on it. It's very helpful to have that sort of, I think, back forth along that particular line. That's such a differentiator for this sort of small, intentionally structured learning environment we set up. So pivoting rather abruptly here, but in deference to the sort of questions we have brewing in the Q&A, I did want to ask us to talk a little bit about sort of pre-professional or slightly more applied areas of study here. We got a good number of questions about sort of pre-med prep in particular. Not a surprise, this is an evergreen question we have in this space, but also a particular point of emphasis in our sort of curricular itself. But there's others out there in the world of pre-law, pre-grad school, all that sort of like, how do I step away from this sort of place? So I think the question I would ask is one that I think someone in the Q&A framed fairly sharply here, which was, how do liberal arts colleges incorporate liberal arts ideas into the structuring of how they prepare students for pre-professional and or STEM education, which so many people read as primarily done through different sorts of institutions. For this, I guess I'm hoping Rebecca might be willing to weigh in on her friends, many of whom are pre-med trajectory themselves, and maybe Professor Park to weigh in from the faculty side when that's done. So Rebecca, the floor is yours if you're willing to take it.
Sure, yeah. So I can actually talk about one of my friends who just graduated last spring. She was actually an English major on the pre-med track. So that is not uncommon here at Swarthmore, where you can major in something completely different than probably what you would assume to be pre-med. So that enabled her to take these classes that she was really interested in the English literature department, but then to also complete her pre-med requirements. So this enables her, similarly to how I'm not pre-med by any means, but I'm able to double major in computer science, which is STEM, and also art history, which really provides like I guess, an extra edge to either field, because going into being a software engineer, I know how to critically think, I know how to analyze text, I know how to converse in discussion. And so those are all kind of skills that I've learned through my not so technical classes. But then I also know how to problem solve and work with others and collaborate on a team when I'm approaching a problem set or something like that, which can really help in, I guess, if I pursue the art history field. So it's really, liberal arts allows you to not just get stuck focusing on being pre-med or being an engineer. Instead, you're kind of forced to try these new subjects and supplement what you're learning in one field with something that might seem completely different. I know at Swarthmore we have a 20 credit rule where of the 32 credits you need to graduate, 20 of those have to be outside of your major. And I know a lot of these schools on this panel have similar rules in their distribution requirements. And that's because you, in order to graduate, you have to take classes that are kind of outside of your comfort zone, but that are also provided like super beneficial for you in the long run because they teach you new skills. I actually came into Swarthmore really not liking English and writing, but because I had to take a couple writing classes, now I actually like one of my favorite professors is in the English department, and I've taken multiple of his classes, and it's like just a great experience to get to be a CS major or be on the pre-med track, but then to also have these experiences in totally different fields, because at the end of the day, it just really helps build you into like a student that knows how to kind of do it all intellectually.
So I think that was a really great description of some of the benefits that come from being at a liberal arts college, even if you're interested in a STEM discipline. From the faculty side of things, you know, I would say, you know, one thing, if you're going to take pre-med classes, for instance, is, as somebody else said, those classes are likely to be fairly small at our kinds of institutions. And again, you get to know your faculty well. So you get a chance to talk to somebody about why it is you think you want to pursue medicine. You know, what is it you want to do? What actually are your goals? And I think that's where the liberal arts perspective, you know, the fact that you will be taking other courses, philosophy courses and English courses and history courses, can really help inform you and help you make just much more mature decisions about why is it you want to go to medical school? You know, what kind of work do you want to do? What kind of difference do you want to make in the world? We know we have lots of students who go pre-med and you know, I'm sure at all of our schools, but our students do very well getting into medical programs. But I think the edge that they have is that they have really had a chance to think hard about how that fits into what they want to accomplish in the world, and you know, what they want to bring to that. And it's not just about, you know, there are some schools where you actually major in pre-med, right? And you may really find yourself taking a very narrow range of courses. And that actually doesn't necessarily make for the best, you know, medical profession, right? You would really like to have doctors who can read and who can write and who can think about what all the impacts of their decisions are. And so, you know, that ability to really combine those different perspectives, I think, is tremendously valuable. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Professor Park, for sort of giving us some anchoring in that question. I recognize it's a little open-ended, but I appreciate the way you got to it. Some good questions building here about how we think about both these sorts of institutions as small, intimate learning spaces, but ones that are sort of deeply connected to broader communities of learning and research and experience off campus itself. I think all the institutions here really excel at making sure our students get out into the world as part of their undergraduate curriculum just in general. And I'm curious if we have a chance to talk about how study abroad or study off campus or even research opportunities sort of out in the field sort of plays in. And for that, I'm wondering if Professor Lopez might be willing to talk about sort of the connection between off-campus research and off-campus study and the on-campus experience a little bit. And then I'm hoping a student might be willing to weigh in on their sort of experiences off-campus as well. So Professor Lopez?
Yeah, there's a couple of different elements too here. There's a study abroad program. I know at Amherst, and I think this is true for all the colleges represented here, a very large percentage of the junior goes to study abroad, and they're able to put that together even with some kind of complicated majors that might have a lot of requirements, like neuroscience, for example. And there's ways to make that happen. And then there's other ways to work with the communities around you. I think this is true for all these colleges. There's a lot of coursework that finds ways to connect classes with the community. From everything from teaching within prisons to collaboration work with community colleges to going out into the community and doing a lot of collaborative learning, going to Puerto Rico and working with the hurricane relief as part of a course. There's a lot of these different kinds of programs. So there's a wide range of different kinds of experiences that people can have in terms of getting off of the campus. And I think it's important to point that out because these are small colleges. Some people worry, will I feel claustrophobic? Will I be stuck in that campus? Not at all, right? There's so many ways to connect with the community around you and with the entire world.
Thank you, Professor Lopez. Rohan, Jeremiah, Rebecca, have any of you had a chance to take some research out into the field or study off campus over the course of your time thus far?
I can jump in. So I actually was able to do that my sophomore summer. And so kind of how I found out of the program is that I was on a mailing list in the environmental analysis department at Pomona. And I'm not an EA major, but I was just on the mailing list and I was like, oh, this seems really interesting. And it was a kind of a fellowship at Harvard Business School doing research in organization and markets. And I thought like this sounds super interesting, so I'm just gonna go for it. And you know, I was talking to my economics professor at the time who helped support me with my application, kind of connecting me with professors in the economics world, and eventually got the opportunity, was able to do research in Cambridge. And what I like found really rewarding with that experience is that it was a great opportunity to get access to like what like a doctoral program might look like, what a PhD might look like. But the opportunity was because of like kind of the resources, you know, my school had. And I'm sure all the colleges here have similar resources, and all of your professors will have connections to different institutes, different other faculty members that are across colleges. But that was one way where I was able to kind of like do research outside of campus. And something interesting that we do at Pomona is that we like have these like symposiums at the beginning of the fall semester where everyone does like shares about their cool research topics that they've done either on campus or off campus. And so that's kind of my personal experience and how like a connection at Pomona helped me get an off-campus research opportunity.
Jeremiah, please.
Just want to jump in really quickly and mention that there are also opportunities to go study away without fully taking the semester off. One of my closest friends who didn't want to leave the sort of residential campus community is currently going to Spain this next weekend with her professor. The professor is going to attend a conference, and the conference theme aligns perfectly with what my best friend's like medical Latinx research interests are. And so the two of them are going off together. The professor just agreed to help sponsor the student and take them with them to the conference. And so again, this is a product of a close relationship with a faculty member, a working connection, having done research together, that the student became aware of an opportunity, and the two of them are going to get off campus and go to Spain to check out some of their research in person.
That sounds amazing. Thank you, Jeremiah, for sharing that. Thanks everyone for jumping in and sort of giving a sort of back and forth faculty-student exchange sort of thing. I did want to open up some questions now in light of the really good and sweeping questions that have been coming into the Q&A. And here's a reasonably direct quote from the Q&A, and I wanted to hear what you have to say. When you picture your best student, faculty, or most successful peer, students, what does that picture look like? Right? What are the traits or properties you would bring forward as really sort of really helpful and instructional to those families and students who are here tonight who may be looking to get that composite sketch a bit? Does anyone feel like stepping into that first? It's a conversation. I don't think there's a set answer here. It's all yours, Professor Elfheim.
Sure, I'll just mention one thing really quickly, and that's that for me, like my best students are the ones who are just sort of like innately curious, right? Like, so these are people who, again, sort of like, I always think that the best students are the ones who are just like always asking me more questions, right? You know, like these are the like the engaged students who oftentimes they're there not because that they like absolutely need to get the A on this assignment, but they're the ones who just really want to engage in a series of sort of like protracted, extended conversations around the nature of sort of like contemporary art or how it fits in with our world today, right? These are the kind of, how should I put it? Like, these are the big questions of my field in many ways, right? And the students that, again, I'm always, that are always like a dream for me to work with are the ones who just like incessantly just like keep asking questions because of just pure curiosity. Yeah.
Thanks for stepping in there, Professor Elfline. Professor Park, please.
So I guess I would say something perhaps similar, but for me, it's sort of an intellectual open-mindedness. I think especially as a chemist, so I see students who are trying to take chemistry, obviously, and I think often in high school, students maybe get the idea that science is all about having answers and just knowing how to get to answers that we already know about, when in fact, that's not at all what we do, right? We're all doing research. We're trying to answer new questions and discover new things. And so students who are willing to, it can be a little uncomfortable at first to suddenly realize that actually, no, it's not about answers. It's about learning how to ask questions and learning how to frame questions and learning how to approach problems that you haven't seen before. So the students who are sort of most willing to do that and most excited about doing that are the ones that, you know, I'm the most excited about working with.
Thanks, Professor Park. Professor Lopez, please.
Yeah, and I agree with everything my colleagues have said. And I think a lot of it comes down to the joy of learning, this uninhibited enthusiasm, right? These are schools where students and faculty can really geek out about stuff, right? And we love to do that. We love to get really excited about an idea and to see someone really dive in without being afraid of being wrong or looking stupid, right? That's what we do all the time, be wrong and be stupid, you know, hopefully with a good outcome. But that willingness to engage what's at stake with ideas, but also to try things out and to dive into new areas, to take a class in something a student has never taken before, and just try to figure out how do you learn that subject. And as professors, we do that all the time in our research, but also we work with students who are doing that. And that's really exciting. Those are students that bring real joy to me on a daily basis as I work with them.
Thank you, Professor Lopez. All right, students, let's talk a little bit more about peers who are really relishing in sort of succeeding and finding a happy spot in the selective liberal arts environment. What sort of traits do they bring to the table? What sort of peers do you think of?
I'll jump in and say I think collaborative is and like just being really open to anything that may come in the classroom. That includes like I have students being really open with their personal stories, their personal experiences, how they read the reading through this lens, and this is why they're challenging the author's point. And then at the same time, a collaborativeness within your peers, having those friends who, after a problem set, you all go together, go over to the dining hall and you grab dinner together. And then you go back to the library, you continue working on that problem set again together, and you're there until midnight, just absolutely working it out. It's the peers, for me, I think the most successful peers, my favorite peers to be with, are those who have this kind of openness to anything that may come, and within the classroom and without outside of the classroom, they really just are open to those conversations and those moments that a residential community provides.
Thanks, Jeremiah. Rebecca?
Yeah, I'd like to add on by saying that something that I think is a big change from high school is that students at these colleges are really passionate about learning and what they're learning in their classes. Going to class is never a chore, especially because you get to select what classes you're taking, and especially because you have so much say in what you're choosing at these schools, because the distribution requirements aren't that strong, or I guess that specific. It really enables you to take classes that you're actually curious about. And so I know in the high school I went to, like, there was also a lot of talk about not really like what you're learning, but how you're doing in a class, like grades wise, which I absolutely did not enjoy. And as Jeremiah just said, these schools really talk about collaboration, but I was blown away when I actually got to Swarthmore and saw how students like really passionately want to help each other. Your professors will be amazing and go so far out of their way to provide office hours and extra help hours and stuff. But I've really found that what sets these schools apart is that students want to see you succeed. They'll never ask you what you got on a test. They'll never ask you like what med schools you're applying to, anything like that. Instead, the conversations are about what you're learning, what you're excited about, what extracurriculars you're doing, or like how you're supplementing what you're learning in the classroom. And I find that that creates a really healthy campus culture that we have, especially because academics can be a lot and can take up a lot of time. But when it's something you're excited about and actually like to talk about with your friends and other people, it just really adds to the experience.
Thanks, Rebecca. I appreciate that take, sort of framing that. And I can't help but think that you're sort of speaking to how a collaborative and sort of intentional learning environment is fueling something like a sort of bravery of the student body to pursue and push beyond where they might be. And with that in mind, I'm wondering if Professor Lopez would be willing to talk about what I see as a sort of bravery in the student who went to work with Google with zero computer science experience before signing up for that sort of thing, and the sort of conversations you might have had with that student and the sort of traits that you see that lend themselves to that in your classroom experience. Can you dig into that or unpack that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think it comes down to something that students are going to get out of these liberal arts colleges. And it sounds hard to make sense of when you're first hearing it, but I think something that students get out of it is that they learn how to learn. Right. And we might say, well, what does that mean? Everybody knows how to learn. But no, there's a real art to it. As Professor Park mentioned, that it's about learning how to ask good questions, not just about having answers. Right? How does one ask a good question? How does one figure out when it's a good question? How does one figure out how to make the question better or to think across ideas? That's what you hone at a liberal arts college. You practice and you hone it and you do it over again and you dive into something, head first into something that's a whole new area. And you do this over and over as you're exploring this curriculum that Rebecca was talking about, where you're just having to take a class in something you've never thought about. And you do it over and over. By the time you graduate from one of these colleges, you go into the real world and you're going to realize that you could do things that other people there can't. Well, first of all, you're going to be a really good writer. It's amazing. Most people in the world just aren't good writers. And all these people are when they graduate from these colleges. But also, they're going to have the skill of being able to conceptualize a problem from a new angle, like this student did with Google. They're going to learn how to bring together different areas of knowledge, and they won't need to be trained in everything they're doing. They've spent the last 4 years learning how to learn, and they're going to figure out what they need to do to be a success, to be able to bring forward new ideas.
Thank you, Professor Lopez. Appreciate that. We're down to our last couple minutes here, and I thought I'd flip the script a little bit because we've talked a lot about sort of these, what I would call sort of pre-professional applications of liberal arts experience, about next steps and how it maps out there. And I think there are students for whom it's not obvious or clear that they will go to graduate school. I think some of our panelists here are thinking about that exact sort of situation right now. And first, let me hasten to add, entirely appropriate. Take your time. It's a decision, right? Secondly, I'm curious how we do think about liberal arts as beneficial, even without that obvious next application to some sort of like graduate degree credentialing beyond there. What does it mean? What's the benefit if this is the end of your educational like sort of bachelor's art experience? So, is anyone willing to talk about that from the faculty side a little bit more?
Sure. So one thing I can say really quickly is that I took a long time between undergraduate and graduate school, right? So I took 5 years off, and that was really important for me. So what I did is I moved to Chicago I was an economics major and I wanted to work in the arts, and I just decided I was going to do it, right? And so So this goes along with what Rick said a moment ago, right? Which is that like one thing that I think that liberal arts students are really good at is sort of like also because we have a broad base of knowledge, because we are, you know, as many of my colleagues have said, we have learned how to ask questions, right? This means that, you know, there's something really wonderful about going out into the real world and kind of like diving in, like, you know, like feeling in many ways, like, and you may feel like you're unprepared because it's something which is totally new and unfamiliar. But this is something that we do really well at liberal arts colleges. We kind of prepare students for unfamiliarity in a really, really sort of like rigorous way. And that's something that I really appreciated when I tried to do it myself, right? And eventually I stumbled into grad school and here I am. But that was not the path initially. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Professor Elfline. Are there any students who want to weigh in, imagining the next steps without perhaps a stop in graduate school? What would you summarize as the takeaway for our families and students here tonight? Rohan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I actually am not planning to go to graduate school. I think I'm a little bit lucky in knowing that I already know what I'm going to do after graduation. I'm planning to go into banking and specifically sales and trading. And so I actually was able to do an internship last summer. And what I've realized is like I was one of the only people with a liberal arts school background, is that I can often like think about things in a kind of a perspective that other students can't if they don't have like the liberal arts background. And, you know, I think some people might see it as a disadvantage that I didn't have any knowledge of typical finance. But what I found is that I was able to learn very quickly and was able to think about things critically without like much trouble at all. And I think that is to say that the liberal arts experience of the past couple of years have taught me how to learn quickly, how to analyze things from different perspectives, how to critically think about these things in a way where my lack of finance knowledge was not like something that hindered me. And so what I found was that made me really successful in my internship and hopefully in my career after I graduate, is that I'm able to approach things in ways that like most people don't think about. Like you don't think about anthropology or like psychology affecting like the financial services, but it does. And I think it's like interesting for me to be able to see those things in a way that most people who don't have the same liberal arts background can't.
Jeremiah?
I know we're right at time here, so really quickly, I think another beautiful advantage is professors and the alumni network. So I've had multiple professors kind of connect me with people who are thinking of similar career trajectories as me, students who have gone from one major into a completely unrelated job field. And professors really remember these students that did these things and who are still in these fields. And so I've had connections being made, again, because professors both know their students and also have that time to remember the alumni network and form those really strong connections, which I'm not entirely sure that experience is mirrored over at a larger selective university.
Thank you, Jeremiah, for getting in just under the buzzer. I appreciate that. And Rohan, thanks for opening things up. So thanks all to our panelists tonight. We are at 7:03 p.m. Minnesota Standard right now, which means our panel is coming to a close. Thanks to the many of you who asked questions tonight and were brave enough to hang around for the full range of answers. Thank you to our panelists for cutting out time in their evening to make sure we got a chance to talk through what a liberal arts sort of learning and academic experience means in sort of its more broader shape and context. There's always going to be more information available and coming up on 6colleges.org. That is just dropped in the box by my colleague Emily at Bowden. So don't be shy about going there. A recording of this presentation will show up there shortly. So for those of you who did not get all your questions answered, we tried our level best. We went through hundreds, but we couldn't quite catch them all. So thank you all. Stay curious. I think that was a takeaway this evening. And catch you soon on the next 6 Colleges setup. Appreciate it all. Take care.